about these alleged cables thinks carefully, what they will conclude is that the concern about Iran is well-founded, widely shared, and will continue to be at the source of the policy that we pursue with like-minded nations to try to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons.
Secretary Clinton reacting to one of 250,000 secret diplomatic cables released by the website WikiLeaks. That one deals with the Saudis' concern about Iran, and specifically a cable dealing with Saudi King Abdullah and a communication he had with General David Petraeus saying that the U.S. should strike militarily Iran's nuclear program, saying cut off the head of the snake. According to this cable, King Abdullah urging General Petraeus. Also, Yemen's President Saleh telling General David Petraeus about strikes in Yemen. We'll continue saying the bombs are ours, not yours, about U.S. strikes on al-Qaeda in Yemen. And there are a number of frank assessments about U.S. allies. Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi is called the mouthpiece for Vladimir Putin in Europe, receiving lavish gifts and energy contracts from the Russian Prime Minister. There's a lot more in there. We're going to talk substance first, and then the hunt for the people responsible second. Let's bring in our panel. Bill Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Bill, reaction, what struck you, I guess, most out of the substance of these diplomatic cables?
That the world really does not want Iran to get nuclear weapons, and that Iran's neighbors in particular don't want Iran to get nuclear weapons, and that they would like us to act forcefully to prevent it. They're not worrying about Israeli settlements on the West Bank. They're not worrying about the Arab Street disliking an attack on Iran. And they understand that Iranian nuclear weapons changes the balance of power in the Middle East, might cause them to have to go nuclear. It would be an incredible setback for all American efforts to check the spread of radical Islam and of terror and of further nuclear proliferation in the Middle East and around the world. That's the headline, I think.
And Secretary Clinton, Mara, was trying to downplay that, saying the Mideast is very concerned about Iran anyway. But it seems that these diplomatic cables really harm the diplomacy, the ability for these people to talk with the U.S. candidly going forward.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I agree with Bill that that's the most important thing that has come out so far. For years, we've been hearing that the Arab leaders want Iran to be denuclearized and would not be upset if Israel made a strike on them. And this backs it up. I mean, it turns out that's true. Now, the King of Bahrain even saying that the consequences of them having weapons would be greater than the consequences, the blowback from a Israeli military strike. I think, yes, of course, this might complicate things, their ability to talk candidly, but now the cat is out of the bag, and I really wonder in some perverse way if this isn't a positive thing for the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has been trying to get tough sanctions. They've been actually having some success, and now we know that there is actually a consensus in the region on Iran.
Charles?
It's like the previous WikiLeaks leak on Afghanistan. It told us generally stuff we already knew, but it put meat on the bone.
Like Iran acting in Afghanistan, that sort of thing.
With direct quotes and a citing of incidents. Here we already had this. I mean, I'd been saying, a lot of people have heard from diplomats that in private the Arabs have been saying, please attack Iran. Do anything that you have to do because a nuclear Iran is intolerable in the region. And there was a hint of that this summer when the UAE ambassador at a conference in Aspen actually said exactly what we heard in the WikiLeaks. The leader of Bahrain say, namely that even the consequences of an attack, which would be serious, would be a lot less bad than having a nuclear Iran. And you get these, it's not just that the Saudis would welcome an Israeli attack or American attack. They have been demanding or begging for a U.S. attack. The king of Saudi Arabia, not just an underling, over and over again. Because, again, unlike Israel, which has a deterrent, is quite strong, these are defenseless countries sitting on huge resources, and they are looking at a Persian adversary after millennia of Persian attempts to dominate the region. This is something that for the Arab states is historic, extremely important, and now we have the direct quotes, and we know that the Arabs in that part of the world are almost united. The exception, of course, is Syria, which is an ally and a client of Iran, in wanting us to do something about Iran's nuclear weapons.
Bill, what about these other revelations that don't seem as important, but perhaps are very embarrassing? British Prime Minister David Cameron called a political lightweight, other names in these cables, as well as the fact that Secretary Clinton and prior to her, Secretary Rice ordered U.S. diplomats to spy on other diplomats, collecting their frequent flyer and credit card numbers and other information.
Well, it's diplomats from hostile nations, and especially from nations like North Korea and Iran, with which we don't have diplomatic relations. It's useful to know a little bit more about them and who they are in case one wants to deal with them later on, eavesdrop on them, bribe them to defect. You know, it's important. It's a tough world out there. You know, I mean, there's a lot of interesting little details and tidbits. Some interesting stuff came out just about an hour or two ago on North Korea and China, which suggests that North Korea is more out of control, or at least China claims to have much less control over North Korea. They made this claim to our ambassador to South Korea than we thought. But what strikes me the most is just, you know, it's a dangerous world out there. I mean, when you read these cables, all the notion that, you know, these were mostly from the Obama administration, and people hoped, President Obama hoped that things would change, outreach to the Muslim world and diplomacy, and then you really read these cables, and it's tough out there, and I think it strengthens the notion that American strength is necessary to deal with these threats.
Charles?
There's one specific incident about China which again reinforces the idea that despite our pretense that it's a strategic ally, or at least we have a coincidence of interest, is not so. And that was in November '07, when our Secretary of State asked that, had gotten wind of the fact that China was going to be a transmission point for long-range weaponry components from Pyongyang to Tehran, and it went through China, and we asked our ambassador to do everything that we could to stop the shipment. We couldn't. So here you have China collaborating with the two major nuclear rogue states, the threats of rogue states on the planet, helping one to arm the other. That's a major, a serious development.
Last word, Mara. How much damage control is Secretary Clinton doing around the world, and why not put President Obama out on this and say, we're sorry?
Well, right now I think the decision has been made to leave her in the lead, and I think it makes sense at this point. This came from the State Department. She's been calling all these people that she deals with. I think for now this makes a lot of sense. And I actually think that the substantive stuff that's come out that we've just talked about is much more important than the ruffling of feathers of saying nasty things about other leaders. This is what people do behind their backs. And I don't actually think that the personal stuff is going to have a lasting impact.
The Secretary said you should,
you
talk to
hear
someone.
What they're talking about and saying about
me. You should hear what we're saying about the U.S.
Except it's not published.
That's not published.
That's the
right.
difference.
Tell us what you think will be the diplomatic fallout from the WikiLeaks release. Vote in our online poll at foxnews.com/special report. Next up, damage control. The weekend release of more than 250,000 classified State Department documents by the website WikiLeaks has caused embarrassment in Washington and alarm in other capitals worldwide. The Italian foreign minister called it the September 11th of world diplomacy. We have Fox team coverage tonight. White House correspondent Mike Emanuel is monitoring the administration reaction. But we begin with national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin on today's attempt at damage control.
250,000 secret and at times scathing diplomatic cables, mostly from the last 3 years, were released by the whistleblower website WikiLeaks. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton tried her best to deflect the damage.
So let's be clear. This disclosure is not just an attack on America's foreign policy interests. It is an attack on the international community.
But it is likely to jeopardize more than one clandestine Pentagon operation. Secret conversations between the Saudi King Abdullah and the top U.S. military commander in Afghanistan, urging the U.S. to militarily strike Iran's nuclear program. Quote, cut off the head of the snake, King Abdullah implores General David Petraeus. An embarrassing revelation that the president and foreign minister of Yemen are lying to their people about U.S. airstrikes against al-Qaeda. Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh told General David Petraeus, quote, we'll continue saying the bombs are ours, not yours. Cables show China allowed North Korea to ship missile parts through Beijing to Iran and confirmed China hacked into the Google website. And then there were the frank assessments about U.S. allies. Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, quote, the mouthpiece of Vladimir Putin in Europe, who receives lavish gifts and energy contracts from the Russian Prime Minister. British Prime Minister David Cameron, quote, a political lightweight. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, quote, avoids risk in Israeli creative. Another surprising revelation, Secretary Clinton herself ordering U.S. diplomats to spy on other diplomats, collecting their frequent flyer and credit card numbers. WikiLeaks founder, the former Australian computer hacker Julian Assange, has not been charged with publishing classified U.S. documents, but has been charged with rape by 2 women in Sweden. The suspected source of the leak, Private First Class Bradley Manning, a former intelligence analyst based in Baghdad, is now being held in a maximum security prison in Quantico, Virginia.
Charged with mishandling classified information, Private Manning faces 52 years in prison and could face more charges. And this isn't the end of the WikiLeaks saga. The Pentagon now bracing itself for the release of 15,000 more documents on the Afghan war. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon tonight. Jennifer, thank you. Now to a very...
Good morning, everybody, on a Monday after the holiday, and good morning. A diplomatic crisis to wake up to today. The White House on damage control after WikiLeaks posts sensitive diplomatic messages between the U.S. and its allies overseas. Maybe the biggest bombshell, Iran is said to be working with rogue state North Korea. Iran's president only moments ago calling the information, quote, mischief. And there's a lot to go through on all this morning. Good morning, everybody. Hope you had a great turkey with your family and your friends. Went by like that.
It went by really quickly. Welcome back to you.
Nice
Welcome
to
back,
see Mark.
everybody.
I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Bill. And I'm Martha McCallum. Well, this latest leak that we're talking about is 250,000 communications, and it's sending shockwaves really all around the globe. The White House is calling it reckless and potentially dangerous.
Yeah, others saying it could have a major and damaging impact on U.S. foreign policy starting now, costing the lives potentially of Americans around the world. Listen here.
Well, one, leaking the material is deplorable. I agree with the Pentagon's assessment that the people at WikiLeaks could have blood on their hands.
Lindsey Graham with Chris Wallace Sunday. Now, Jennifer Griffin leads our coverage in the Pentagon. What is in these documents?
Well, Bill, perhaps the most stunning allegation was the revelation that the Saudi and Bahrain kings were both calling on the U.S. to militarily strike Iran's nuclear program. That is going to be deeply embarrassing to those Arab leaders. Then there was also revelations that the Yemeni government was covering up American missile strikes against al-Qaeda in Yemen. The Yemeni president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, told General Petraeus reportedly, quote, "We'll continue saying the bombs are ours, not yours." There were also concerns about a cozy relationship between Vladimir Putin, the Russian prime minister, and Silvio Berlusconi, the Italian prime minister, including, quote, lavish gifts and energy contracts. Mr. Berlusconi, quote, appears increasingly to be the mouthpiece of Putin in Europe, according to the WikiLeaks documents. The Saudi king called President Zardari of Pakistan the greatest obstacle to that country's progress. Quote, when the head is rotten, King Abdullah said, it affects the whole body. Officials with the DEA intercepted the Afghan vice president carrying $52 million in cash on a trip to the United Arab Emirates. A cable from Kabul then said Ahmed Massoud, the vice president, quote, was ultimately allowed to keep without revealing the money's origin or destination. An embarrassment to the Kabul regime. Now, since 2007, the U.S. has been secretly attempting to remove highly enriched uranium from a research reactor in Pakistan for fears it could be used in an illicit nuclear device. All of these revelations bound to set back, we're being told, non-proliferation efforts by the State Department. The Pentagon has officials here up in arms about how the diplomacy will be set back in coming days.
We're going to go over a lot of that, too, with John Bolton in moments. Jennifer, thank you for that. Jennifer Griffin leading our coverage. There's a lot to go through.